Hi Ian, thanks for making contact and thank you for the footage. The way I'm going to do this is just work through your swing from P1 setup to sort of P8, P9, sort of completion of your swing. Just give you some indicators in regards to a few key areas that you could work on. There's a lot of good stuff in this swing, and with the sounds of it, your golf's in pretty healthy shape. You just need to improve that strike on your sort of mid to longer irons. So um, obviously at first when you look at the screen, don't panic too much. There's a lot of lines on there. I've just put those on to save me a bit of time as we go forward, and each one will become sort of more apparent as we go as to how important it is and how it relates to your swing. So looking at the setup, I quite like the setup. I think from face on you could definitely put more weight forward. If you look at yourself within that red box, there's certainly more of you to the trail side than there is to the lead side. I would like to see you flex the lead leg a little bit more, move both centres slightly further forward, and the feel here would almost be that you're sort of 70% in favour of the lead leg. That would be a feel. That wouldn't be the actual position you would be in. But what it would help do, and I'm just going to pop another line on here for you now that we're talking about this. What it would help is with the positioning of both centres in relation to the golf ball. So at the moment, upper centre and lower centre, sort of, just behind the golf ball. I would like to see those two centres moved into a position that is over the top of, if not more in line with, the golf ball as we see it. So both centres generally with a mid iron would be stacked upon top of one another. That doesn't necessarily need to be the case. You could have a little bit of side bend like I'm indicating here, where the lower centre is maybe an inch out in front of the upper centre. That's not a major issue. What that would do is it would help level up the shoulders. It would help with the ascent of the golf club during the takeaway. It would encourage your knees to work and your pelvis to work on a little bit more of a tilted angle, and it would also help tidy up what you're going to see from P1 to P2 just ever so slightly. So little change at P1, just feel like you've got 70% of your weight on your lead leg, courtesy of flexing the lead leg more. There are various ways of putting the weight forward. I prefer to use the extra flex in that lead leg, and it may even be that when you look at it on camera, you look or you feel like you've got the lead leg flex more than the trail leg. That's often the case, and it's not a major issue. So a little bit more level with the pelvis, a little bit more level with the shoulders as a result of that, which is going to help any picker of the golf ball get a little bit more downward angle of attack in there at P1 at least. Now obviously things can change then during the time and space of the swing, but you are at least sort of preempting the correct sort of move with your address position. Down the line, I really like your address. Haven't got any real issues with it. If we move a little bit further into the swing now, we look at P2. P2, from P1 to P2, the hands tend to sort of go, they don't go out, but they don't really come in enough. I'd like to see them maybe come in a little bit more. Having said that, the knees don't change flex a great deal either. So consequently, the more they change flex, which you're going to change at setup anyway, the easier it's going to be to get your hands to work inwards. But again, nothing sort of other than tidying up really. Certainly not the priority. There is a tendency to just come out your inclination ever so slightly from P2 to P3, but it is only slight. Put the white lines on there for your sort of pelvic tilts and your inclination at P1. I'll come to the purple line shortly. P4, get a little bit across the line. Again, the change that I've suggested at P1 could help with that. There's also the way the accumulator, I don't know if you're familiar with the accumulators, but there's the way you load the wrists, the trail arm, the lead arm during the backswing, and the sequence that you load them in can have or does have an effect on the alignment at P4. Just going to take your swing back a little bit. Sometimes if you see a player whose elbows are sort of level like this, at P2, that can often lead to it. In your case, that's not the case. Change flexing the knees a little bit more, work the hands in a little bit more, have the weight forward at setup a little bit more. You may start to see a little bit more of a differential between the forearms and a little bit more tilt in the shoulders, which again would help with your inclination. But again, these are just tidying up pieces. Swing going on. So a little bit across the line at the top. Don't worry about that. We'll work on that in subsequent sessions as and when required. Now the bigger issue in regards to your contact, and this is your priority, is the overtaking rate of the golf club is far too high. And what we're going to do going forward is we're going to use this position you're in now as a sort of ongoing reference. It's going to take you back down the line. See the chest starts to pull away, head starts to come away from the wall. Your inclination now and your pelvic tilts are on the purple lines. A little bit of loss of inclination. And you can see where the blue line was on your arm at P1 and your trail arm at P1, how much more straight that arm is. So as the chest pulls away, you have to widen the arc to reach the golf ball. Because the chest is pulling away and the arc is getting wider, the angle of attack is starting to shallow out, and also the base of the swing. So straightening the arm out too much too soon, which I'll come to how to sort of prevent that shortly, is what's widening the arc. Wide arcs always shallower arcs. So if you had a sort of relatively narrow arc, the angle of attack will be relatively steep. If you take that same arc and make it much wider, beg your pardon, so if you get the same arc and widen it, the angle of attack now is going to be shallower. So there's one reason you're a little bit of a picker. So straightening the right arm. If you straighten the right arm and don't pull away with the chest, then you're going to hit the ground behind the ball. So as you pull away with the chest, the centre of the swing, which is the lead shoulder, starts to work up too fast. Consequently, as you're pulling away from the golf ball, it's very hard to control the low point of the swing because the low point of the swing is lifting with you. So you're trying to time those two movements, pulling away, straightening the arms, pulling away, straightening the arms. So we're going to come to that, and we'll go back to that reference point that I talked about. So when we look at your swing in future, and what I'd like you to do when you're practicing is don't be frightened of sending me some footage over. I will, if I've not already done it, I'll forward my mobile number to you via email so that you can use WhatsApp. If you use that facility, really easy to get swings to me. I'd really like you to sort of email me or WhatsApp me some swings on a sort of weekly basis as you're practicing. If you've got any questions, just feel free to fire them across to me as well. So when your lead arm, I'm just going to get rid of those lines now. In fact, I'm going to leave a few on. When your lead arm is vertical, the shaft of the club, and a little bit of shaft blur here, is way too far forward. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use that lead arm vertical as our constant, and we want to see this shaft start to come back more sort of in line, and even ever so slightly lagging behind the hands by the time the lead arm gets vertical. What I'll also do is I'll email you some images of a guy I've been working with on this out in Austria, and he made great, the last time I visited him, he made some great improvements in regards to this particular change. So it'll just give you a nice visual as to where we're going. So we definitely need to improve the alignment of the shaft in relation to the left arm as it's coming into that vertical position. So that's going to be our constant when we assess your swings in future. You can see already there that you've got quite a severe tilt in the shoulders, lead shoulders working up very quickly, clubs passing the hands at a very high rate, so he's therefore coming out of the ground very quickly. So it's not even a chance to reach its lowest point before it's being brought out of the ground. So it's typical of someone who is sort of going to pick the ball off, struggle with his contact with his longer mid-irons. A byproduct to that is an exit that looks pretty low, yellow line, followed by hands that exit relatively high on the red arrow. So for all intents and purposes, you look like a low exit player here and a higher exit player here. Again, typical sign of someone who's overtaking too quick, as is the very square-on nature of the impact position. You see the knees, pelvis, shoulders, very, very square-on at impact. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to compare you with a sort of model swing and give you an indication as to where you want to put your attention when practicing. The things I've discussed from P1 to P4 are just tidying up pieces. Obviously, you know, you live a long way away. It's not like you're going to get on the mat, you know, on a regular basis with me, so I want to just try and give you some food for thought once you get this particular move in place, so you can tinker around with the other pieces. But I'm going to get to the priority now with the model swing alongside you. Okay, so here we are at our point where we said we would use as a constant reference. In your instance, because of the camera speed, I can't quite get your lead arm vertical, so I've put Grant just beyond vertical as with yourself, but you can see straight away there's some marked differences. Lead wrist with Grant is much flatter, as opposed to being in the process of extending. Your shaft, and again a little bit of shaft blur, but I'm going to, based on my observations over the years, I'm going to take the shaft as being pretty much in line with that trail arm at that point. You can see now with Grant how there's more of this sort of flying wedge that people talk about, which, to be fair, is relevant, but is a subsequent effect of other things in the swing, in my opinion. I think it's done far too much by far too many people without a great deal of success, because whilst the flying wedge is evident in good players, it's the result of other things. So if those other things aren't in place, you can rehearse the flying wedge as much as you want. You're never going to have it in there when you pull the trigger. So you can see some differences there at that stage. You see more than anything how little the shaft has overtaken, if at all, at this point. If I take him back to when his lead arm is vertical, I just go one frame back because of that deflection in the shaft. You can see now that he's driving that club forward into the ground, and that's going to bring me onto the feel for yourself. So from or throughout the downswing, but certainly from sort of P5.5, where we see here where the lead arm gets on the trail hip, there is with every player there is a thrusting of that right arm. So your right arm throughout the downswing is trying to straighten, but it's also straightening in a certain direction. So when I look at Grant's, the general direction of the thrust, so it's like the trajectory of the hands. If you were viewing this swing from above, the general thrust is diagonally out in front of him. So it's not a sort of definitive one-dimensional movement, but it's a general impression. The hands are being driven diagonally out in front of the golf ball, so to a point sort of on the ground out here. Now with yourself, it's like you're directing that thrust more towards that golf ball. So the general movement and the general impression is that that right arm is straightening out at the ball as opposed to out in front of the ball. When you start to do that, you start to maintain the wrist angles for longer. So as the hand path is directed diagonally out in front of that golf ball, you can see the angle in the trail wrist is maintained all the way to around about 6.5, then it will start to gradually come out. So by the time the right arm gets parallel with the ground, the club is just starting to pass the hands. In our case, the club is passing the hands way sooner than that. And by the time the trail arm gets parallel with the ground, you can see that there's been a tremendous amount of overtaking. So there are a number of ways to develop this. I'm going to give you a few ideas now. Obviously you've got the visual there, so swing to the top of your backswing and consider the direction that you're going to drive that right arm in. You can drive it at the ball, or you can drive it out in front of the golf ball. I'm going to give you some visuals now from sort of a few drills that I've done with players over the past season that'll give you some ideas, and then also touch on a very good drill from a ball striking perspective, which I'm going to explain to you. I can't obviously demonstrate it, but I'm just going to explain to you, and you can play around with it in the net whilst practicing in the back garden. Okay, so first we've got me playing around during shutdown with a couple of exaggerated versions of what we've just discussed. So the right arm during the downswing is straightening, but it can straighten in various directions. So what I'm going to do here now is play this video through, and you'll see the marked difference in the direction of the thrust of the right arm and the effect that that has on the overall look of the swing. So in the first instance, I'm straightening the right arm out, sort of a point that's behind the golf ball. And in the second instance, I'm straightening the right arm out, diagonally in front of me. Now if you consider where the butt of the club is, at P6, much further forward out in front of the golf ball, the general direction of thrust diagonally out in front of me, out behind me, and then you consider the width of the arc. This golf club is, the sweet spot is way, not, it can't even get in the screen, way outside or way away from the centre of the arc, whereas this radius is much tighter, meaning that the angle of attack into the golf ball is going to be more descending than we see here. It's going to be more level to the ground. Too level to the ground means you have a chance of hitting the ground behind the ball, especially when the wrist angles start to come out. So consequently, I'm going to start pulling away with the chest. Ignore the angles that are coming up there, by the way, because they're not definitive angles by any stretch of the imagination. So two very different ways of straightening out the right arm. Hand path is out behind the ball. It's being directed out behind the ball. Hand path being directed diagonally in front of me and out in front of the golf ball. You get a really good visual of that when doing it yourself, because you can sort of trace the trajectory of the hands as you're doing it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring another drill up that I think is going to benefit you when you're out practicing. Okay, so here this gentleman was continuously struggling with his angle of attack, was always bottoming out behind the golf ball, didn't really have any descent. Tendency was to just drift off ever so slightly in the backswing. We weren't working directly on this, but you can see straight away he starts to do the drill. He stays over the top of what would be the golf ball. A little more, almost without thinking, just in anticipation of what he's trying to do during this drill. So what we've done here is put a golf towel on the mat. I've asked the player to address the golf towel right at the front edge. So the leading edge of the golf club is here on the front edge of the towel. And then I've asked him to make a swing, miss the towel, hit the ground out in front of the towel. That's all I've been asked. That's all I've asked him to do. Now straight away he's a little bit more stacked at the top of the backswing. I'm just going to run this through for you. Some lines will come up anyway because this is an excerpt from his lesson, but it's pretty evident straight away what happens in regards to the sort of positioning of the hands and the direction that that right arm thrust is being moved in. So there's me just going through the lines during his lesson. Right arm straightening out at this point. Straightening out, straightening out. General thrust direction is sort of, in this man's case, down this way somewhere. Butt of the club too far back, nowhere near the trail leg. Now the hand path trajectory is different. Much more sort of general direction here because that's where he's trying to hit the ground. But the club starts to get onto the trail leg. So if you consider the angle of attack on the left swing versus the angle of attack on the right swing through quite a simple drill. Now what you can do is you can develop this drill, a really good starting point, but what you could also do is you could get a golf towel, fold it in half and position it a grip's length behind the ball that you're going to hit, and just hit balls trying to miss that towel. So to miss that towel you have to have a descending blow. If you get too low to the ground and the angle of attack becomes too level, you're going to hit the towel. So the act of missing that towel will tighten up a lot of things in regards to the radius of the swing, the overtaking rate. You can already see there, if you look at your setup, you're going to really have to get that weight forward to miss that towel consistently. You can do that dynamically in the downswing if you wanted to, but that's not the easiest and most efficient way of doing things. Putting that weight forward at setup can really help. Now, I did mention about the player I've been working with in Austria, and I will send you the images across at some point. The drill we had Peter doing was simply to, and we did this for quite a prolonged period of time, but if you're practicing in the back garden and you've got the net, you can do this no problem. We had him trying to fly to 7-iron as low as he possibly could from his standard setup. So in order to flight the golf ball as low as you can from a standard setup, at impact, I'm just going to play through to impact, you would have more weight forward. You would have less side bend away from the target. The shoulders would be less steep. The lead arm would be much further forward. So if you were wanting to try and flight this ball as low as you could, I would expect to see a body structure that looked more like this. Shoulders a little bit more level. Lead arm a little bit more forward. As a result, the shaft would be angled forward. So the path of the hands would have to be different. Again, you can film this from various angles, but face on down the line's fine for now, but we may come up with some, or encourage you to do some different angles as well. So that's another drill. So just flight the ball as low as you can. Peter would do that for an hour, and then I'd say, right, okay, hit a shot, and we would film that shot from face on and look at what happens when the lead arm's parallel, lead arm is vertical. And that's really what I wouldn't mind doing at this stage. When you've worked on the drills, maybe spend a little bit of time, just say, right, do the drills for an hour, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to film it face on, send it to Darren, and I'm going to keep checking where you are when that lead arm is vertical to the ground. Don't stand on ceremony. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask them. If you ever want me to look at a swing, just send me the swing across. I'll look at it as soon as I possibly can. So they would be the drills that I would use. Another way of looking at things would be to, I'm just going to get rid of our friend there on the left for a second. Bring up a model swing for you. And we used Grant last time, so keep him on there. If you look at a player with a lower overtaking rate, P8, which is when the shaft is parallel with the ground, happens above the level of the belt. Yours is happening around about on or slightly below the level of the belt. Can't quite pick it up on that. So one feel would be to have P8 happen as late as possible. So just chip some balls forward, trying to feel like that shaft doesn't get parallel to the ground until very late in the through swing. It's quite a feel-based one, and not everybody can get that. It's something that's I use quite a bit when I've got somebody on the mat and I can put them where I want them, and we build that up. But it's just a little bit of extra food for thought for you while you're tinkering around with your swing. So main considerations: set up, weight a little bit more forward, feeling like it's 70-30. In the takeaway, allow the knees to change flex just a little bit more, which that setup's going to encourage anyway. But then the direction of the right arm thrust and the trajectory of the hands throughout the downswing, rather than at the ball with a thrust, you want that thrust out in front of that golf ball, diagonally out in front of you is where the thrust should be directed. When you do that, the lead arm is going to be vertical and the shaft is going to be more angled downwards, club hitting the ball, as opposed to everything lining up too much too soon, looking to reduce the overtaking rate. And you'll also see that you pull away from the golf ball less because the wrist angles will be maintained in a much more appropriate manner. Good luck with it. Like I say, if you've got any questions, feel free to ask. And good luck in the lockdown. Hope everything works out fine for you and your family.